The cub called her meat without teeth. Right there, in the middle of the archive hall, with 17 other Thornbacks within earshot and 2 instructors passing through the western corridor, he planted his haunches on the stone floor, lifted his scraggly little chin, and delivered a blood insult to a human woman who outweighed him by at least 40 kilos. I dropped the assessment tablets I was carrying. You need to understand something about Thornback Academy. We are not a school in the soft sense that other species use the word. We are a proving ground, a crucible. For 600 years, the children of the great prides have come here to learn what it means to be predators, not just in body, but in spirit, honor, hierarchy, the sacred geometry of challenge and response. These are the foundations upon which our entire civilization rests. When someone delivers a blood insult, there are exactly 2 acceptable outcomes. The insulted party kills the offender, or the insulted party is revealed as too weak to defend their honor and is cast out from all social standing forever. There is no third option. There has never been a third option. The framework simply does not accommodate anything else. And this cub, this child with his patchy mane and his ribs showing through his dull fur, had just told a human that she was prey flesh, unworthy of acknowledgement, that her presence contaminated the air, that her species crawled from the mud only to serve as sustenance for their betters. The human's name was Margit Szabo. She had been with us for 3 cycles, contracted to restore the ancient manuscripts in our archive's deep collection. Quiet woman, kept to herself, had clever hands and a seemingly infinite patience for the delicate work of rebinding texts that predated our spacefaring era. I had spoken to her perhaps 4 times, always brief exchanges about her supply needs or work schedule. I had never given much thought to her beyond that. Humans were a curiosity to most of us. Soft, clawless, with those strange flat faces and their bizarre endurance capabilities. Some of my colleagues found them unsettling. I found them largely irrelevant to my duties. My duties, at that moment, involved supervising the 2 cubs who had been assigned to archive cleaning as punishment for setting fire to Instructor Galif's meditation garden, Rissak and Tovvi. Both from the southern continent, both barely past their first molt, both utterly determined to cause me as much administrative difficulty as physically possible. Rissak was the instigator, always was. His family had fallen from grace 3 generations back. Something about a failed challenge to a pride leader. The details varied depending on who told the story. The shame of it clung to his line like smoke. His mane was coming in patchy and uneven, a visible marker that his bloodline was weakening. Among our kind, that sort of thing matters. It matters enormously. Tovvi was his shadow, smaller than him by a fair margin, with enormous amber eyes that tracked everything and everyone. She rarely spoke, but she was always watching. I had written in my assessment notes that she showed promise for strategic thinking. What I had not written was that she seemed to attach herself to Rissak out of something uncomfortably close to loyalty, which was unusual for cubs so young. They had been scrubbing the floors near the restoration alcove when it happened. I was reviewing their progress from across the hall, making notes about their technique and attitude. Rissak had been growing increasingly agitated all morning. I had noticed but not intervened, assuming he would settle once the tedium of the work wore down his restlessness. I was wrong. He stopped scrubbing, stood up, walked directly to where the human woman was bent over a fragile manuscript, her strange blunt fingers working some kind of adhesive into the spine. And he spoke the words. The silence that followed was absolute. I have been den keeper at this academy for 19 years. I have witnessed challenges that ended in death. I have seen cubs tear each other apart over perceived slights. I have managed the aftermath of honor killings and written the letters to grieving families. None of those experiences prepared me for the silence in that archive hall. Every Thornback in the vicinity had frozen. Instructor Malak, who had been passing through with a stack of examination materials, went completely still with 1 foot raised mid-step. The 3 senior students studying at the far tables had turned as one, their ears flattening against their skulls. Even the ambient sounds of the building seemed to pause, as if the stones themselves were holding their breath. Tovvi had edged backward, her small body pressed against a bookshelf. Her tail was tucked completely under her belly. Her eyes, those huge amber eyes, were fixed on the human with what I can only describe as preemptive grief. She was waiting for blood. She was preparing to watch her only friend die. I was already moving. My mind had shifted into crisis management. The human would kill the cub, that much was certain. Even soft species had limits, and this insult transcended cultural boundaries. Then I would need to restrain her for proper proceedings. Notify the cub's family. Notify the human's embassy. Prepare statements. Calculate the political fallout. Rissak was still holding his posture, chin lifted, trying to look defiant. But I could see his hindquarters trembling. He had committed to this, and now he was realizing what he had done. The bravado was cracking. Underneath it was the same thing I saw in every struggling cub who lashed out beyond their capacity to follow through. Terror. The human woman looked up from her manuscript. She studied Rissak's face with an expression I could not read. Her eyes, brown, flat, lacking the reflective quality of proper predator vision, moved slowly over his patchy mane, his too thin frame, his trembling hindquarters, the way his claws were extended but shaking. She set down her adhesive brush, she tilted her head slightly to one side, and she said, in that quiet voice humans use when they are not trying to project dominance, "Is something wrong at home?" I stopped walking. I could not have heard that correctly. My translator must have malfunctioned. There was no possible way that a sapient being, any sapient being, had just responded to a blood insult by asking after the offender's welfare. Rissak's ears went flat against his skull. Not in aggression, in confusion. Complete, absolute, system-breaking confusion. He had delivered the worst words our language could produce, and the target had responded with concern for his emotional state. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. Tovvi made a noise. I have supervised thousands of cubs over my career. I have heard every sound our young can produce. Mewls of hunger, screams of rage, the quiet keening of grief, the triumphant roars of successful challenges. I had never heard the sound that came from Tovvi in that moment. It was somewhere between a whimper and a question. High-pitched, truncated, utterly lost. As if the basic framework of her understanding had cracked down the middle and she was searching desperately for something to hold on to. The human was still watching Rissak, patient, calm, waiting for an answer to her question. "I asked if something was wrong," she repeated gently. "You seem upset." Rissak backed up a step, then another. His trembling had gotten worse. He looked to me desperately, as if begging me to make this make sense. I had no sense to offer him. The insult hung in the air like smoke, unanswered, unchallenged, simply acknowledged and set aside, as if it were nothing more than a child's tantrum to be weathered rather than a mortal offense demanding immediate response. Tovvi had not blinked in 30 seconds. Her eyes were locked on the human woman with something that was not fear, not quite, but something adjacent to it. Wonder, maybe, or the beginning of worship. Rissak's defiance had collapsed entirely. He was just a cub now, a frightened cub who had thrown everything he had at an enemy and watched it dissolve into nothing. He had expected death, or at least the terrible clarity of violence. He had received kindness instead, and he had absolutely no idea what to do with it. Neither did I. The human smiled, a small expression, barely visible, and returned to her manuscript. As if nothing had happened, as if a child had not just tried to destroy her social standing in front of witnesses, as if she had already moved on. I stood in the middle of the archive hall, emergency protocols still running uselessly through my mind, and tried to understand what I had just witnessed. I could not, and from the looks on those two cubs' faces, neither could they. I found Instructor Galeth in his office 17 minutes after the incident, and I was not composed. "There is no protocol," I said before he could even offer greeting. "I have checked the disciplinary archives, the cultural liaison documents, the interspecies incident reports from the last 200 years. There is nothing, nothing at all." Galeth looked up from his assessment tablets with the particular expression of someone who suspects they are about to regret asking. "No protocol for what, precisely? For when a blood insult is not answered." His ears twitched. "That is not possible. A blood insult is always answered. That is the definition of a blood insult." The human did not answer it. "Then she has accepted shame and exile from." "She did not do that either." Galith set down his tablets very slowly. His claws made small clicking sounds against the surface as he processed what I was telling him. I watched his face move through confusion, disbelief, and finally something approaching the same systemic shock I had experienced in the archive hall. "What did she do?" he asked eventually. "She asked the cub if something was wrong at home." The silence stretched between us. Galith's tail had gone completely still, which only happened when he was genuinely disturbed. "I do not understand," he said finally. "Neither do I. Neither does anyone. The cubs are. I do not know what the cubs are." Rissak looked like he had seen a ghost. Tovvi made a sound I have never heard before. I began pacing, unable to contain the restless energy that had been building since the incident. I have searched every database, every cultural exchange document, every recorded interaction between our species and humans. No one has ever simply declined to respond to a blood insult. It is not done. It has never been done. Perhaps humans do not understand the severity. She understood. I saw her face when she heard the words. Her translator was functioning perfectly. She knew exactly what the cub had said to her. Then why? I do not know. We stared at each other, two experienced educators confronting something completely outside our frameworks. Galith's claws were kneading his desk pad in the same nervous gesture I had seen in anxious cubs. It would have been amusing under other circumstances. "We need to speak with her," he said. "Explain her rights." Perhaps she simply does not understand that she is entitled to satisfaction. This seemed reasonable, logical even. Perhaps the human was operating under some misapprehension about our customs. Perhaps she believed she had no recourse. I could explain. I could offer the proper channels. This could still be salvaged into something that made sense. I found the human in the same place she had been before, bent over her manuscripts, working with patient precision on some fragment of text that predated my great-grandmother's birth. She looked up when I approached, and her expression was pleasant, calm, completely unburdened by the social catastrophe she had created. "Den keeper Vekosh," she said in that mild voice. "Can I help you with something?" I had rehearsed this conversation in my head. I had prepared careful explanations of our customs, our requirements, the formal mechanisms by which she could demand satisfaction for the wrong done to her. What came out instead was considerably less elegant. "The cub insulted you." "Yes," she agreed, returning her attention to her work. "He did. You have the right to demand satisfaction. We will restrain him for you. You may claim blood debt, or you may." The human looked up again, and there was something in her flat brown eyes that stopped my words mid-flow. Not anger, not confusion. Something closer to genuine puzzlement. Why would I want to hurt him? I opened my mouth, closed it, tried again. He delivered a blood insult. In our culture, this demands. I understood what he said. She set down her brush and turned to face me fully. I also understood that he is a child. He barely comes up to my hip. His mane is still coming in patchy. That means something to your people, does it not? He is struggling. Whatever he said to me came from that struggle, not from any genuine conviction about my worth. I stared at her. "He is still a child," she repeated, more gently. Hurting him would not undo the words. It would only add more pain to a situation that clearly already has too much of it. There was nothing in my training that equipped me to respond to this. I made a note in my mental files that humans might be genuinely insane, then immediately questioned whether that assessment was accurate. She did not seem insane. She seemed entirely lucid. She simply operated according to rules I could not comprehend. I retreated to observe from a distance, because I did not know what else to do. The cubs began behaving strangely. Tovvi started following the human. Not obviously, she was too clever for that. But I noticed she would position herself at study tables with clear sightlines to the restoration alcove. She would volunteer for shelving duties that took her past the human's workspace. Her enormous amber eyes tracked every movement the human made, every gesture, every interaction. Her ears were perked forward constantly, not flattened in fear or aggression, but forward, alert, interested, as if she was trying to memorize something she had never seen before. Rissak was less subtle about his inability to stay away, but considerably more committed to pretending he did not care. He developed a sudden, passionate interest in the historical texts shelved near the restoration area. He asked questions about archive organization that he had never shown any curiosity about before. He found 17 different excuses to pass through the hall where the human worked, each one flimsier than the last. He never looked directly at her, but he was always aware of exactly where she was. I documented all of this in my observation notes, though I had no idea what conclusions to draw from it. Cubs who had witnessed a successful challenge typically showed either respect for the victor or contempt for the defeated. Cubs who had witnessed an unanswered insult should have been showing contempt for the human's weakness, perhaps even escalating their own attempts to establish dominance over such an easy target. They were doing neither of these things. Administrator Proke arrived on the 4th day. I had been expecting this. Word travels quickly in an institution like ours, and an incident of this magnitude could not remain contained to the archive staff. Proke was a large thornback with a steel-gray mane and the perpetually irritated expression of someone who had spent too many years dealing with problems that should not have been his responsibility. "The human," he said without preamble. "Explain." I explained. His expression grew progressively more troubled as I spoke. She did not respond at all? No challenge, no demand for satisfaction, no acknowledgement of the offense? She asked if the cub was having difficulties at home. Prock's ears went flat. "That is not a response. I am aware. The social framework requires. I am aware of that as well." He paced my office with the restless energy of a predator confronting something he could not hunt. His tail lashed behind him, and his claws kept extending and retracting in unconscious agitation. "Perhaps she is mentally damaged," he said finally. "Some humans are, I understand. Perhaps she is incapable of recognizing threats. That would explain?" A sound from the doorway interrupted him. The human was standing there, a stack of preservation supplies in her arms. She must have been passing by on her way back from the storeroom, and she was laughing. Not loudly, not mockingly, just a quiet, genuine laugh, as if Proke had said something unexpectedly amusing. "I recognized the threat just fine," she said, her voice mild. "I simply chose not to respond to it in the way you expected." Proke's fur bristled. "You heard? Hard not to. You were not exactly whispering." She shifted the supplies in her arms and regarded us both with those flat, unreadable eyes. The cub was hurting. Hurting creatures lash out. Responding with more hurt would not have solved anything. It would have just created more pain. She nodded politely and continued down the corridor, leaving Proke and me standing in stunned silence. "What does that mean?" Proke demanded, turning to me as if I had answers. "What does any of that mean?" I could not tell him. I had no framework for it. None of us did. 3 days later, Tovvi appeared at my office door. She was trembling. Her small body was pressed low to the ground in the posture of a cub bringing difficult news to a superior. Her claws were kneading the stone floor in rapid, anxious movements. "Rissak has stopped eating," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He has not touched food in 2 days. He will not tell me why, but I think he is waiting for something." My chest tightened. Waiting for what? I do not know. Her amber eyes were huge and wet. But I am waiting too. We both are, and nothing is coming, and I do not understand why, and it is. Her voice cracked. It is wrong. Everything feels wrong. She should have hurt him. She should have done something. Why did she not do something? I looked at this small, frightened cub, and I finally began to understand what was happening. They were waiting for punishment, for retaliation, for the universe to make sense again in the only way they knew how, through the clear, brutal logic of challenge and response. The human's mercy was not registering as mercy. It was registering as a void, an absence, a held breath that never resolved into exhalation. The lack of consequence was destroying them more thoroughly than any violence could have. And then Tovvi said something that made my blood run cold. "I brought her a gift today, a stone I found near the northern fountain." She thanked me and asked my name. Tovvi's claws stopped their anxious movement. She remembered it later. She used it when she spoke to me again. "That is—" I hesitated. "That is concerning, Tovvi. You should not be forming attachments to—" "She is not weak," Tovvi interrupted, and there was something fierce in her small voice. "I thought she was. When Rissak said the words, I thought he had found prey. But she is not prey. I do not know what she is, but she is not prey." She looked up at me with those enormous eyes, and I saw something there that made every instinct in my body go quiet with alarm. I am going to bring her a better gift tomorrow, Tovvi said. Something worthy. I want her to remember my name again. She left before I could formulate a response. I sat in my office for a very long time after that, turning her words over in my mind. The cubs were not seeing weakness. They were seeing something else entirely, something our language did not have words for. And Tovvi had started bringing offerings. I did not know what that meant. I was not certain I wanted to find out, but I was becoming increasingly convinced that whatever was happening in that archive hall was going to change something fundamental, not just for those two cubs, but for everyone who witnessed it. The human continued her work on the manuscripts, patient and calm, apparently unaware that she had set something in motion that none of us knew how to stop. The gifts kept coming. I cataloged them in my observation notes because I did not know what else to do with the information. On the 6th day, Tovvi brought a piece of dried meat from her own ration premium cut. The kind cubs hoard jealously and trade among themselves like currency. She left it on the edge of the human's workstation and retreated to a safe distance, watching with those enormous amber eyes. The human looked at the offering, then at Tovvi, and smiled. "Thank you, Tovvi. That is very kind of you." Tovvi's whole body shivered, not with cold or fear, but with something else entirely. Her ears were so far forward they nearly touched at the tips. Her tail, usually tucked low in the manner of an anxious cub, had risen to a neutral position. When the human spoke her name, Tovvi made a small chirping sound that I had only ever heard cubs make with their mothers. On the 8th day, it was a stone, smooth, dark, with veins of copper running through it. Tovvi must have spent hours searching the academy grounds for something so perfect. She presented it with both paws, head bowed, in the formal posture of an inferior offering tribute to a superior. The human accepted it the same way she accepted everything, with grace, with attention, with the quiet dignity of someone who understood that the gift mattered more than its material value. "This is beautiful," she said, turning it in her strange, blunt fingers. "Where did you find it?" "The northern stream," Tovvi whispered, "where the water runs over the old stones. I thought you might like it." "I do, very much." The human set the stone beside her manuscript in clear view. "Tell me about your family, Tovvi. Do you have littermates?" I watched Tovvi's entire body transform. The anxiety melted away. She sat up straighter, her fur smoothing, her eyes brightening, and she talked. She talked more in that single conversation than I had heard from her in 3 cycles of supervision. About her sister, who was training at a military academy in the eastern provinces. About her mother, who led a small pride in the mountain territories. About her father, who had died in a border dispute before she was old enough to remember him. The human listened to all of it, asked questions, remembered details, used Tovvi's name again and again as if it were precious. Tovvi vibrated with something that looked from a distance remarkably like joy. On the 12th day, she brought a shed fang. I nearly intervened when I saw it. A shed fang is not a casual gift. Among our people, it is one of the highest honors one can bestow. A piece of oneself, freely given, representing absolute trust and devotion. Cubs do not give shed fangs to anyone outside their immediate family. The implications were staggering. The human accepted it with the same quiet grace she had shown every other offering. But I saw something shift in her expression. A flicker of understanding, perhaps. An awareness that this small, anxious cub with the amber eyes had just handed her something irreplaceable. "Tovvi," she said softly, This is very special. Are you sure?" Tovvi nodded so vigorously her whole body moved with emotion. "I am sure. You remembered my name. You asked about my family. You—" She hesitated, searching for words. "You see me, not just a cub. Me." The human was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and did something I had never seen a non-Thornback do. She placed her hand on Tovvi's head between her ears in the gesture of familial affection. Tovvi closed her eyes and leaned into the touch, purring. I could not watch any longer. I retreated to my office and sat in the dark for nearly an hour, trying to process what I had witnessed. When I finally emerged, I went directly to the restoration alcove. The human was alone, working on a particularly damaged text, her clever fingers moving with practiced precision. She looked up when I approached, unsurprised. "Den keeper Vekosh. I was wondering when you would come. I did not bother with pleasantries. Why?" She set down her tools. You will need to be more specific. Why did you not answer the insult? Why did you not kill him or at least demand satisfaction? You understood what he said. You admitted as much to Administrator Proc. You knew the severity of the offense, and you simply— I struggled for words. You simply asked if he was troubled. Why? The human was quiet for a moment, her flat brown eyes distant. When she spoke, her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. Because he reminded me of myself. I blinked. I do not understand. When I was his age, she paused, seeming to gather herself. When I was young, I was angry, all the time, at everything. I had reasons, or I thought I did. My family situation was difficult. I felt powerless, and because I felt powerless, I lashed out at everyone around me. I said terrible things to people who did not deserve them. I tried to hurt others before they could hurt me. She looked down at her hands. I was not a good child. I was frightened and lonely and too proud to admit either. But you are human. Your social structures are different. You do not have. The specifics are different. The feelings are not. She met my eyes again. When I looked at that cub, Rissak, I did not see an enemy. I saw a child drowning in something too big for him to understand. The patchy mane, the way his ribs showed, the desperation in his eyes when he said those words. He was not attacking me. He was screaming for someone to notice that he was in pain. My mind was struggling to keep pace with what she was saying. But among our kind, those who are in pain either dominate others, which is their right, or they are dominated, which they deserve. Pain does not create. Misdirected aggression? She finished. It does among humans. Hurt people hurt people. It is one of the first things we learn about ourselves, and one of the hardest to overcome. She smiled, but there was sadness in it. I learned it the hard way. I hurt people I loved because I did not know how to ask for help. By the time I figured it out, some of those relationships were beyond repair. I will not get those years back. I will not get those people back. She picked up her tools again, returning her attention to the manuscript. I could not save myself at that age, she said quietly. But maybe I could give that cup a chance I never had, a moment of grace instead of the violence he expected. Maybe it will matter, maybe it will not, but I had to try. I stood there for a very long time, her words echoing in my head. Hurt people, hurt people. The concept was so foreign to our way of thinking that I could barely hold on to it. Among Thornbacks, pain was a crucible. It forged the strong and eliminated the weak. Those who suffered either rose above their suffering through dominance or succumbed to it through submission. There was no third path. There was no acknowledgement that suffering itself might warp behavior in ways that had nothing to do with strength or weakness. But if the human was right, if pain could create aggression that was not about hierarchy at all, but about desperation, then everything we understood about our own social structures was incomplete at best. I left the restoration alcove in a daze. I found Tovvi and Rissak in the eastern courtyard. They were huddled together in a patch of sunlight, and Tovvi was grooming Rissak's mane. Her small tongue worked carefully through the patchy fur, smoothing and cleaning, while Rissak sat motionless with his eyes half closed. It was an intimate gesture, a nurturing one, the kind of thing mothers did for cubs or littermates did for each other in times of distress. I watched Tovvi tend to Rissak's visible mark of shame, and I wondered if she was trying to fix something that went deeper than fur and skin. I wondered if she had learned this from watching the human. I wondered what else these two cubs were learning day by day, gift by gift, in the quiet hours of the archive hall. Rissak approached the human 3 days later. I was nearby close enough to intervene if necessary, far enough to give the appearance of privacy. I saw him coming long before he reached her. His whole body was trembling. His ears were flat against his skull. His belly was so low to the ground that his fur dragged on the stone floor. Every line of his posture screamed submission. But it was not submission. Not exactly. It was something else. Something that had no name in our language. He stopped a full body length away from the human's workstation. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The sounds that came out were broken, barely coherent. I need. He shook his head violently, ears flicking. I do not know the words. We do not have. There is no. The human set down her work. She rose from her chair. And then she did something I will remember until the day I die. She knelt. She lowered herself to his level, folding her long limbs until her strange flat face was even with his. She did not loom over him. She did not force him to crane his neck upward. She came down to him as equals, as if he were not a disgraced cub who had offered her mortal offense. "You want to say you are sorry?" she said softly. "Is that it?" Rissak's whole body jerked. "We do not. That is not a concept we—" "I know, but you feel it anyway, do you not? The weight of what you said, the wish that you could take it back, the knowledge that you caused harm, and the desire to somehow make it right." She tilted her head slightly. "That feeling has a name. It is called remorse, and the words that go with it are simple. I am sorry. I was wrong. I will try to do better." Rissak was shaking so hard I thought he might collapse. "I am," his voice cracked. "I am sorry. I was wrong. I will." He choked on the last part, unable to finish. "That is enough," the human said. "That is more than enough." She reached out and placed her hand on his head, between his ears, just as she had done with Tovvi. Rissak made a sound high and broken and desperately young, and pressed into her touch. Behind a nearby shelf, Tovvi was crying. The quiet way cubs cry, with no sound at all, just tears tracking silently through her fur. I stood frozen, watching this impossible scene unfold. A human woman, toothless, clawless, mocked by every species in the known galaxy, was teaching a thornback cub something his entire civilization had never conceived of. Remorse. Apology. Ma'am. The radical notion that causing harm could be addressed through acknowledgement and change rather than blood or exile. Rissak and Tovvi were learning things no thornback had ever taught them. They were learning from a creature we had dismissed as prey. And as I watched the human comfort the trembling cub, her hand gentle on his patchy mane, I realized something that made my blood run cold. She had not just forgiven an insult. She had rewritten everything these two cubs understood about strength, about power, about what it meant to be a predator. And they would carry this with them. They would grow. They would lead prides of their own someday. They would teach their cubs. The human had planted a seed, and she had no idea what kind of forest it would become. The council chamber fell silent when I finished my report. I expected outrage, demands for protocol, discussions of how to handle this unprecedented breakdown in challenge, response dynamics. Instead, Elder Cometh, the oldest thornback alive, who had not spoken in council for a decade, asked one quiet question. "What did the cubs learn?" I had no answer. The council was dismissed without resolution, as if the eldest among us understood that something beyond our frameworks was taking shape. I returned to find the human teaching Rissak to repair a damaged manuscript. His small paws moved carefully over the torn binding while she guided him with patient words. "Gently. Work with the material, not against it. You can restore what was broken." Tovvi was curled at the human's feet, purring. The metaphor was so obvious it physically hurt. Over the following days I witnessed something unprecedented. Rissak and Tovvi began disagreeing without clause, expressing frustration with words, admitting mistakes without showing belly. When Tovvi knocked over an artifact, Rissak simply said, "Accidents happen. The human says mistakes are for learning, not punishment." I did not know whether to be amazed or terrified. Then the human finished her contract. She packed her tools with methodical care while both cubs watched from the doorway. Rissak tried to look dignified while tears streamed down his muzzle. Tovvi did not even attempt composure. She wailed openly, the raw keen of genuine grief. The human knelt before them one last time. She gave each cub a handmade bookmark with their name carefully inscribed. Rissak said, "Brave enough to change," beneath his name. She promised to write. She held them both. Then she walked away. 3 days later, Rissak appeared in my office with Tovvi trailing behind. "Why do our people not do what she did?" he asked. "When someone is hurt and scared and lashing out, why do we answer with more hurt instead of asking what is wrong?" Tovvi spoke softly. "She was stronger than anyone I have ever seen, and she never showed her teeth once. I am telling you this because you need to understand why no one mocks humans at Thornback Academy anymore. Not because we learned they are dangerous, we knew that. We stopped because 2 cubs watched a human choose mercy over vengeance, and we saw what that mercy created. Rissak's mane is growing and thick now. When younger cubs make mistakes, he helps them instead of attacking. Tovvi breaks up fights using words. She asks, "What do you actually need?" and it works. These two will lead prides someday. They will teach their cubs what they learned in that archive hall. A seed has been planted. I do not think Margit Szabo understood what she started. She was just being herself, responding to pain with compassion, treating a small predator with gentleness. But she has changed us. It all started because one human looked at a frightened, angry child and asked if he was okay. We have no word for what she did. I think we will need to invent one.